This is Pod Populi.
Podcast for the people.
The Great Love Debate. It's the Great Love Debate.
The Great Love Debate. It's the Great Love Debate.
Hi again, everyone. It's Brian Howie. Welcome to the Great Love Debate, the world's #1 dating and relation podcast. Since 2015, I am back here in the very fine and fancy studios of Pod Populi, Podcast for the People. I am at the one in Boca Raton, Florida. It's actually nice here in Boca Raton, Florida. It's not always nice, but today it's nice. I want to get into today something that it's always a little bit of a third rail around here. This is the second podcast I've done in the last month or so that is sort of devoted to a certain demo who listens to this show, I think, more intently than any other. A demo that has, I think, more challenges when it comes to love, dating, and relationships than a lot of the others. And I know you're probably 23 listening to right now, and you're like, no, the challenges are the worst 23. It's 62, you're listening, and you're like, oh, the men still suck after 50 years of dating. But the ones who sort of like ground zero for this subject matter, because there are a lot of questions, concerns, crossroads, all of those things, is sort of the women between 35 and 45. So that sort of age bracket really does have to deal with some unique challenges. And so if you are that 23-year-old woman, listen to this, you're going to get there. And if you're 62, listen to this, you got through it. So a couple weeks ago, we touched on one with the lovely ladies from the 30 End podcast, and we touched on a little bit, but I wanted to dive deeper because it's not always the easiest subject matter for a boy to jump into, and I get in a lot of trouble, but I think sometimes men have clarity on some of these issues in a way that a lot of women don't because they are a little bit distant from it, and they can look at reality of it. And so I'm going to bring in a pro here. We're going to talk about the unique challenges that come along with the subject of fertility. And she hosts one of the better podcasts I've ever heard on the subject matter. It is really, really hard to both offer hope and also grounded in realism. You know, there's a lot of books and there's a lot of clinics and there's a lot of people that are sort of selling, you know, outliers, or they're putting out there a false sense of reality. She is the host of the Badass Fertility podcast. And like I said, she seems to have a handle on this in a way that I have not heard anybody talk in a way that resonates with me. So I can't imagine that it wouldn't resonate with the women and a lot of the men who are listening to this. Kathryn Bregman, how are you?
Hello, good morning. I am wonderful, thank you.
And her shirt says the badass woman in me honors the badass woman in you. Do I have badass woman in me? Do we all have badass woman in us?
We all have a badass feminine side. Absolutely, 100%.
Obviously, I am always trying to dance around this subject matter, and a lot of men are, you know, I brought this up. I got a bunch of emails on it when I said a couple weeks ago that, you know, men in their late 30s, early 40s who might want to have 3-4 kids, they have to look at the reality of that age in who they're dating if they want to have that. And it's like a conversation I can't have, but it's a conversation you want to have. Mm-hmm. How do you balance the reality with false hope, with really giving people options that everything is possible?
Okay. That's a really, really good question. And it brings up a lot of the tension in dating. You know, I mean, I'm 43 now, but I remember when I was dating in, you know, my early mid 30s, there was always like this sort of, oh gosh, I want to call it like a secret stereotype, but maybe not so secret. Like if you date a woman over 35, oh, you better watch out because she's just looking for, you know, a father for her babies, basically. Mm-hmm. Like she's ready to go, you know? So I think that stereotype is real. It's out there. The degree to which it's true, I think varies from woman to woman. It really depends on a lot of factors, right? Like one of the things I talk about a lot in my show is how we are really socialized within our culture to think of 35 as somehow this like expiration date type of number, right? And honestly, I mean, there is like growing medical research out there that really addresses that is just false, right? It's not true. women can maintain their fertility in a very vital and optimal way. They can even improve their fertility actually as they age, depending on various choices that they choose to make. So this whole idea that like a woman who's 35 has to suddenly be in baby making mode or she's going to lose that opportunity is honestly, it's bullshit. It's not true. And so what I would encourage women to do is to really continue to be selective and discerning, not only about, the partner that they want to choose, but also about how they want to enter into their childbearing years. Because there's a lot of choice in that I think a lot of women aren't made aware of.
Right. They're so they can improve them nutritionally?
Absolutely.
Medicinally?
Yes.
Stand on your head?
100%. So there's a whole bank of research out there and lots of people who specialize in this, and I can make some recommendations later. But yes, diet, nutrition, exercise, all those types of things 100% factor into fertility. One of the things I've talked about on my show, and I don't know if this is getting too technical, but it takes 90 days for the egg that you're going to release to basically turn into that egg. So there's a 90-day window where actually if you make a really concerted effort in terms of how you address certain issues, dietary, lifestyle habits, you can make a huge difference in the quality of egg that you produce just 90 days later.
There are, there's a group of women over here who are frantically hit 34, 35, and they are frantically, overestimating the doom that they believe is coming on in terms of their age. And then there's a group of women over here who are not dealing with it at all. They're like, I'm in good shape. I do Pilates. I can deal with this at 46. You kind of have to bring both of those sides back from the edges a little bit. There is a reality of it that you statistically 37 probably can't have 7 kids. But maybe, everybody's like, you can. No. I don't know. I was a girl who came to one of our live shows here, and she's like, I want to have a big family. I'm a mom, and, I'm 36 years old. And I'm like, I think you got to get on it. But I can't, I'm not allowed to say that out loud as a man.
I know. And it's so hard because on the one hand, I hear you saying that, I get this clenching in my chest, and I'm like, oh, that's not really true.
But how much of it is not really true?
Okay, so I'll put this out there and say this. So first of all,
there are odds.
Yeah, there are odds. I will say this, and if you there's the statistics, and then there's the women who defy the odds all the time. Right?
Correct.
And I would say that, just because there's a lot of medical research out there that says one thing, it absolutely does not mean that women aren't defying that all the time, right? And that's where a lot of my work comes in, which is the mind-body type of connection, because that is what really amplifies your odds. And it's also something that we don't have a ton of scientific research data on, but there's a lot of anecdotal evidence based on the women I work with, based on, the stories that I hear from lots of different people about how we can defy these odds. So if you want to take a moment and think about it, when my mom, for example, who's in her 70s now, had my sister, she was 35, right? And that was old at that point in time. That was kind of today's equivalent of 45, I would say, right? Today, if you want to have a child in your early to mid 40s, right? Women who try for 1 year have a 40 to 50% chance of conceiving in their early to mid 40s, right? That's naturally. That is 1 in 2 women.
And what is that? That's probably not way different at 28.
No,
it's not that easy either, right?
It's not necessarily that different. I mean, any person who's in their sort of optimal fertility, right? They will say, in any given month, you have a 25% chance of conceiving naturally. So theoretically, if someone wants to conceive, it should take them about 4 months. Right. And that's why they have the sort of window of, if you are 35 or over and you've been trying for 6 months, you should get a workup. If you're younger than 35 and you've been trying for a year, you should get a workup. So that's where those types of markers are generated from. Yeah.
Do you throw age out of it altogether? Is there a test that you can do to sort of understand your fertility?
So yes and no. If somebody comes to me and they say, all right, I'm 42 years old and I want to get pregnant, I'm like, yes, absolutely 100% we can do this. And there are a lot of things that we're going to work on. So the first thing that I do when a woman comes to me, because I focus primarily on even just the women we're talking about right now, right? There are women who are listening, and this conversation could feel very defeating, right? Because we're challenging this idea that can she or can't she get pregnant, right? And that is a very personal and a very complicated and deep question. So for the woman who's listening, who feels that edge of, what the fuck, is this making me feel better or worse? I don't actually know. What I do is I would start by working on the mindset. I would start by working on recognizing the innate potential you have within yourself to follow your intuition, to make choices that resonate with you, and to be your own best guide on your journey to your baby. Because I really do believe, and I operate from the assumption that every woman who wants to have a baby, who feels that calling in her heart to become a mom, is meant to be a mom. And what actually gets in the way is the social messaging and the statistics and all of the things that are telling you you can't, or your chances are very slim. Because what that does is it becomes a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy, and we start to believe it, and then we make choices that actually are more self-defeating. I'm not saying statistics don't matter, right? So if you're 42 and you're going to say to me, I want to drink a bottle of wine every night and smoke a pack of cigarettes and, stay up till 2 a.m. and have 6 kids, I'm going to tell you, well, I think we need to figure out which one you want more. You know what I mean? Because you're not necessarily going to have both. But the mindset part is really about learning how to embrace the types of choices that are going to benefit the ultimate desire that you really have.
And you bring up the choices. And a lot of women say, throughout their dating years, I want to get married and have kids. One sentence, get married and have kids. It's the same.
Yeah.
There's a point where you have to decide which of those at a certain age is a priority. There are a lot of ways, and women are obviously more independent than ever, that you can have the kid or kids and then circle back to the married, and that's a perfectly reasonable way to do it. Yep. Because a lot of women, they go out at 37 years old and they go on a date and they do the math where they had 2 years on. Yeah, totally. Even if we like each other, we get married in a year, and if it goes really, really well, and they're bailing out of possible relationships that could work out because they do have this 2-year add-on to every single. It's really hard to date that way, and it's really hard to conceive that way.
Absolutely. And it's so funny you bring up the timeline, because the timeline is like one of the number one things that women who I work with come to me with, and that we try to dismantle and get rid of, because the timeline is seriously only going to waste your time, in the sense that exactly what you just said. Like, you go on this date with this guy who could be amazing, but you're so caught up in your head about like, how are we going to make this work on my timeline, that you can like extinguish that fire. And then
you're pulling the emergency chute way too quick, because you're like, I don't have time to work out this icky point in our dating that happens in every relationship. It's 3 months in, it's like, oh, this isn't perfect. Then you're going backwards because you're doing math constantly.
Exactly. And it's the same thing when women are trying to conceive, right? Except it becomes, extremely intense, and then it also involves your sex life, right? So it's like, okay, we have to have time sex all the time, and then you're like exhausted after that window, and then you don't have sex for a couple of weeks, and then you have it really intensely, and it becomes like exhausting. The impact of infertility on relationships is huge, and it's so interesting to me that you bring up this timeline issue, because I always think of it in terms of that fertility world, but you're connecting it to the larger timeline of relationships, which is fascinating. Right? It's really, really an accurate, insightful point. The
other side of that, a lot more women are freezing their eggs, and we're going to get into that shortly. But a lot of women say, "Oh, I'm cool. I froze my eggs," and they take their foot off the gas in terms of dating. They're like, "Oh, the eggs are frozen. I'm good. That'll work out. I'll come back to that at 45."
Right.
When if they had maybe just kept dating naturally is never a good term. I don't know what that is. Okay. It might have worked out naturally too, Yeah. It's all, you're not really game playing, but you're sort of hope playing on all of it. Like, you're always looking at the perfect scenario, and life doesn't give you the perfect scenario. You could get married and want to have, and he can't conceive it, or he's sterile, or he's got issues, which is a very underrated part of this whole equation.
Yes.
That a lot of men don't test it, or they get older, or or they have low sperm count. There's a lot of ways to go about this, that the burden is unfairly a lot on the women. We're going to get into all this. Like I said, we could take a deep dive on this. I got to take a quick break. I am here with Kathryn Bregman. We are diving into badass fertility. She is badass and she can hopefully help you with your fertility. And we will be back right after this. And we are back. Obviously, the technology has improved in a lot of ways.
Yes.
How much can you trust it? I know it's a loaded question.
Okay.
Let's start with the egg freezing.
All right.
Is there an age where freezing eggs statistically makes it harder?
Oh, gosh, that's a really good question. I think that when it comes to egg freezing, and this is going more into the medical stuff than I would typically go, but I can give you kind of a generalization.
Right.
It's gonna mirror, the similar types of recommendations that you're getting for natural conception, right? So anyone's going to tell you the earlier you freeze your eggs, the better, right? But it's also going to vary a lot from woman to woman. And that's why a lot of the statistics and the things that we hear about age and numbers are really only like a broad sort of outline of the truth for every individual person. And not only the truth for every individual person, but that truth can change at different phases of her life. So generally speaking, yes, of course, the younger the better, right? I'm not going to pretend like, oh, all of the eggs that you have at 45 are just as good as they were when you were 25.
Right.
Like that's probably not true, right? It's not true. But what is true is that it only takes one good egg to get pregnant. And a woman at 45 still has tens of thousands of eggs, right? So you gotta have a good
frozen 39-year-old egg as viable as a natural 42-year-old egg?
I mean, that would absolutely 100% vary from woman to woman.
I know. It's all stats. I know. We're not trying to be doctor.
You want numbers now.
No, I don't.
Yes,
well, I think
you're getting attached
I just
to it.
want there to be some reality in it because the outliers give hope.
Yes.
But the outliers sometimes lead to choices because you're like, oh no, I read about in the paper, 47 years old, so-and-so had twins.
Right. Yes, true.
So we can't pretend the conversation doesn't matter, but there needs to be nuance to the conversation.
Yes.
And there's a lot of shades of gray in here that when it comes to dating, or even if you are in a marriage that you're thinking of getting out of and you're 38 years old and you're like, or a relationship and you're like, oh, I want to get out of this, but I still want to have kids. So maybe I'm going to stick with my idiot husband to get one more baby out. It is constantly, women have to do this. So is there a reliable test that you can, how good your eggs are? I mean, is that the way? Is that
definitely.
the phrase?
There's there are reliable tests. But what's interesting about that again is that so you can go and get a blood test, right? And the blood test is going to tell you things like your AMH and your FSH and your estrogen levels and your progesterone levels, and all of those things have ranges that are optimal based on the range of age for a woman, right? So there's an ideal range for, I'm making up the numbers, but say 30 to 35, and there's an ideal range 35 to 40. So yes, absolutely. Like if you decide to freeze your eggs, if you decide to do any sort of assisted reproduction, if it's IUI or IVF, that's the first thing they're going to do. I mean, if you just go to your OB and say, I think I want to try and conceive, he or she might say, let's do a blood test and just make sure that everything's optimal.
So a blood test,
right?
You don't need to pull out a bunch of eggs.
Oh God, no. No.
It's just a blood test.
It's just a blood test.
Huh.
But then, okay, so that's like step one is the blood test. But now I'm going to throw in, the other curveball, which is that these blood tests they're not like, because the problem is what I see a lot happening with women is they look at the blood test as a seal of their fate. Right? So they look at it as if to say, well, my FSH is low. And so now I have to stick with this husband that I don't like because my chances of having a baby later are lowered. Right? Well, that's not necessarily true because what's interesting about the human body, right? And in particular about women, because our hormones fluctuate in almost like weekly cycles. I mean, like every month we're going through all kinds of cycles of hormone production, and the levels that are found in that one blood test can change. Okay. So 1 month you might be low in this, but only a little bit. And the next month you might be just fine. So like it is a marker. Okay. It's a good thing to know. If you get a blood test and it says you have heightened AMH, there's like, again, dietary choices you can make to fix it. Like there's a lot you can do. So blood test is not a seal of your fate. It's information that you can use to empower
something,
you.
it's not everything.
Absolutely, 100%.
All right. This is a very personal subject matter, so I'm going to get into the personal side of this. When did you become so interested in this?
Oh, good question.
Where were you along the line where you're
Yeah.
like, I need to figure out my own body?
Yeah. Okay. So it's funny that you say that because I would, speaking about the blood test, I would use myself as an example of that because I got married when I was 36, right? And I remember the day I got married, I'm like, all right, let's do this. We have to have kids, And my husband and I did fall a bit on that timeline. Like we dated for a year and then we moved in together to live together for a year. And I remember him saying like, well, if we weren't 35, like I think I would wait to move in together. But because, we both wanted to have kids. We were on the same page about that. And so he and I decided together, well, like we don't have quote unquote time, right? Like we need to make this happen. So we did. So we got married. We met at 34, married by 36, start trying to have kids. And pretty soon into it, actually, well, first I got pregnant within a couple months, but then we had a miscarriage. And after that, that sort of prompted me down this whole journey. And it actually took 3 more years before we got pregnant again. And then had my daughter right before I turned 40. So going down this path, I did all of it from the assisted reproduction. We did 2 rounds of IVF. They didn't work. I was told by my doctors that I should consider donor eggs, which is a whole other thing that we could get into. They were telling me my eggs were not good. So that's why I'm like really passionate about the egg issue because I know from personal experience that a lot of this relates to chronic inflammation, which is a major issue among people in our society, and it really affects reproductive issues. It's like a very large number of women who struggle to conceive, like 40%, have some sort of inflammation or autoimmune issue that's undiagnosed, meaning that modern Western medicine isn't going to pick up on it. Right? So when I was told these things, I knew in my heart, I was like, I couldn't sit well with donor eggs. I think it's a beautiful thing. I have worked with women who have chosen to do donor eggs. So I 100% support any choice a woman wants to make, but it's got to come from her, right? And for me, it was like, no, I want to do everything possible to build my mind, my body, and my spirit so that I can become the mom I'm meant to be. And then when I started working on mindset, it inspired me to make changes that I didn't feel like I could make before. So I started to eat like an anti-inflammatory diet, which is not what everyone should do, but it's what I needed to do. I started to do certain types of exercises that were good for balancing my hormones, even though I hated them, but I learned how to like be okay with them. And seriously, within like 6 months of working on mindset and literally 4 months of making those changes, I was pregnant naturally after going through a year of treatments at an IVF clinic where they were telling me it was hopeless.
So you miscarried at 37?
Yeah.
And you got pregnant with your daughter just before 40?
Yep.
So what was that 3 years like? Because you must have thought during that time, the miscarriage has to, which is, statistically, miscarriage is perfectly normal.
Yes, it is. 1 in 4 pregnancies, they say.
Right.
Actually, it's a miscarriage.
But you're going through this, like, was that my shot? And then I guess it can't happen. That had to be the darkest time because you're in your late 30s. And
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was...
How do you keep the hope going and how does your husband react and all that?
Well, I mean, honestly, that's why, it changed my life, right? And I always say that, like, it really was the darkest time in my life. And it became, like, my greatest teacher and the thing that has inspired so much light in me and that I also help now bring to other people. So, I always tell people, like, as much as you'll hate me when I say this, it's actually true. Your fertility journey, as I call it, really is a blessing because it can inspire so much growth. So for me, it was horrible. I mean, like, my social life shrank because everything suddenly like started to revolve around trying to get pregnant. So every choice I made revolved around that. What am I going to eat? What am I going to drink? Who am I going to socialize with? Because if these people have kids and they're going to talk about their kids, it's really hard for me. Like, do I go to a baby shower? Do I not go to a baby shower?
Oh, yeah.
All of these questions that you don't think about until you're trying to have a baby and you can't. Right. And then suddenly it's like your whole life starts to be put on hold, and this becomes the one central focus. And then you can imagine the tension and like weight that it places on a marriage.
I can imagine. And the sort of familial and societal pressures around you. Oh my God, when are you guys going to have kids?
Oh my God.
You're going to be an amazing mom, and they have no idea what you guys are either going through or trying to go through on your, it's brutal.
It's horrible. I mean, that question, like, when are you going to have kids?
Yeah.
Or do you want to have kids?
Yeah.
Is like,
Or-
it should be banned.
Or
right?
don't you want to have kids?
Right.
Which is even worse with a negative connotation.
Yeah.
And then a lot of things, a little bit of a sidebar. A lot of times the women, you hear, oh my God, you're going to love being a mom so much. It's the greatest thing in the world. They have kids and it is absolutely terrible for 2 years. None of the fun is kicking in. Right. And they're like, what am I doing wrong? And all of it, the self-doubt.
Totally.
And this was not in the brochure.
Right.
Right. I haven't slept for a decade and all of that. And so it's constantly self-doubt. And as a guy, or if you're the husband or the partner, you're trying to understand, but it's still a lot of times you're just in this whirlwind by yourself, whether you're trying to conceive or actually conceiving. It's rough.
Oh my God.
Why we should pay
really
for the
is.
drinks.
I know.
Guys.
That's true. Ladies, we have earned it, okay? So let them pay.
Yes.
Let them pay. No, but seriously, I think the issue of self-doubt, I think, is huge, right? And it permeates like every aspect of this whole process, from the dating, right? And the timeline on the dating, to the trying to conceive and the timeline on that, to am I a good mom, by the time you finally have your child. So it's a lot, and again, I'm going to keep saying it, like that is where that mindset piece comes in, because that is where you learn how to center and ground yourself and find the confidence and clarity to really like believe in the choices that you're making, because we really do all have like an inner compass, that can guide us to our best self. But we are not really encouraged in our culture to connect with it, right? We're very heady, we're very logical, we're very rational. So we're constantly like deducing odds, playing the numbers game, looking at like the checklist. Can I check all the boxes to make sure I'm a good mom? And we're really tuning out from the information in our heart, right? We're focused more on the head and less on the heart. And so what I do is I help women really connect more with that internal compass, that internal knowing that we all have, so that when they make those choices, they can say like, yeah, I am a good mom. I am making the best choice about whether or not to go on a date with this guy. I am making the best choice about what to do with my eggs.
And when you just decided, I'm going to help other women and build this supportive community, was it because I wish I had this then, or was it, I went through this and I want to share this? So like a bit of everything, I suppose.
Yeah, it's really both. Like I remember sitting in the IVF clinic, right, and looking around, and it's this really weird moment in time where you're in the waiting room and what everyone else is there for, right? Because you're only there for one thing. But there's so much shame involved in this journey. Like, and that's why the question of like, do you want to have kids is such a freaking horrible question. Please don't ask people that. If they're, just stay away from it. But it's because there's shame wrapped up in the answer. Like people don't feel comfortable saying, I'm struggling to get pregnant. That is not something you just bring up at a cocktail party. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it's also, so when you're at the IVF clinic and you're all sitting there, it's like everybody's avoiding eye contact. Everybody's kind of like shamefully looking down at their feet and their phones and their paperwork or whatever. But like, I just sat there thinking to myself, like, we are all going through the same thing. Like, where is the sign up sheet for the support group? Like, where is the place where we can come together and understand what each other is going through? So I did not have that. And I think that it is so important. And that was a huge part and what inspired me to start doing what I'm doing.
And that is the part that is missing from a lot of this. A lot of this is so clinical and scientific, and you are missing that spiritual and communal element of it, the support.
100%. And there's actually a really interesting study, and I cannot think of the journal at the moment, but I might be able to put it in the show notes. But they said that women who participate in support groups or get help from coaches or therapists on the fertility journey are something like 65%, I am not even kidding you, more likely to conceive. than women who do not seek out that same type of support. So,
Yeah, I believe
it's
that.
huge. It's a huge factor because it you could go at that from so many angles. Like we don't even have time, I think, for all the angles that you can like unpack that number, but it's it doesn't surprise me. I can say that.
So somebody wants to work with you or you want to work with somebody. What is the process? What is the first thing you do?
So the first thing that people do is they usually reach out to me on my website, badassfertility.com. And on my website, there's a little click for a discovery call, and they'll click on that. They get my calendar and they can hop right on and schedule a complimentary 30-minute consultation where we really just talk about what's going on with them, where they're at in this journey, what they're thinking about. And then we go from there to decide if it's a right fit. Typically, women who work with me will join my Badass Fertility program, and that is an 8-week program where we go through a lot of the different things that I've been talking about. But there's flexibility there too. It's like I really customize everything to the individual.
Are most of the women in relationships? Are they married, or is it?
It runs the gamut. I mean, I have worked with heterosexual couples who are struggling to conceive. I have worked with lesbian couples who want to have a baby and who are using IVF. I have worked with women who are conceiving on their own. Mm-hmm. So it really runs. I've never worked with two men, but I guess that makes sense.
What can the men do to either be supportive, ask the right questions, or what can the men do better on this journey?
Ooh, that is a good question. Oh, what can the men do?
Because you're trying to be supportive, but you don't really understand what she's going through.
There's two ways to look at that, right? So the first one is, I was reading an interesting article the other day, and it was saying that, there's an increasing awareness of the contribution that men make to infertility, right? So the first thing, number one, is that you've got to make sure that your male partner, right, if you're partnered with a man, is getting the equal amount of workup, right, from the doctor as you are. Some doctors are like super equitable. Some are surprisingly not. Okay. So it is really important to make sure that you treat it as a 50-50 thing and that the men and the women get the same physical workup.
Are you sure it's not him is a question that doesn't get asked enough. Probably.
It really does not get asked. I mean, you would think in this day and age it would, but it actually doesn't. Again, like I said, some clinics are great about it, others not so much. So that's the first half, but then that's the physical part, right? The second part is the emotional part. And what we do want to remember, every individual is different, so I don't want to like generalize or stereotype, but I can say, men and women often process their emotions differently. And I saw this come up with my husband and myself a lot in our journey, so I can use us as an example. I'm an emotive person. I want to process my feelings. When we had an egg retrieval and it was unsuccessful, I wanted to like sit on the couch and hold each other all day and cry. He bought 100 bags of mulch and wanted to mulch the yard all day.
Well, an exercise in fertility is mulching. Very symbolic.
I guess so. Yes, mulching, exactly, right?
Planting some seeds.
Planting the seeds. So I was like, what are you doing? I just want to sit on the couch and cry, and he was like, I just need to focus on something else. So one of the things that I would say for both partners is learning each other's coping mechanisms and making space for both. Right? Because it was fine for me to sit on the couch and he could sit with me for a little while, but it was also important that I let him go do the mulch, and vice versa. So it's really having a willingness to acknowledge and, honor your partner's needs for coping and making space for each other's ways and knowing that they're probably different and neither is better or worse than the other. Yeah.
So he has to read the room.
Yeah, I mean, he needs to read the room. And like one thing too, like I always say with my husband, like he wants to fix everything. And I'm like, don't fix it. Just be there for me.
Right.
Right. Like just be there. So for the men out there, a lot of the time it's a very male tendency. They want to fix it. They want to come up with solutions to solve the woman they love's problems. And that's so beautiful and admirable. But what women actually often want is really just to be seen and heard because we are actually capable of solving our own problems. right?
We're practically
we really
obsolete.
Are. No, you're not obsolete at all, but not in the slightest. We need men very much, and we need enlightened men in particular. So
we're all in the we're in the possibilities business here. Everything, when it comes to love, dating, relationship is about possibilities and exploring them. That's what you're about. Is there are lots of paths to possible fertility and outcomes and answers.
100%. 100%. I mean, there are so many paths. I mean, even just, I worked with a couple that decided that they didn't want to have their own child and they wanted to foster a child. And they're now foster parents of two beautiful boys and they couldn't be happier. You know? So there's fostering, there's adoption, there's donor eggs, there's natural conception, there's IVF, there's sperm donation, there's surrogacy. I mean, there's so many choices and it's almost overwhelming, right? How do I want to go?
I know a woman who, she was told she could never have kids. It led to the demise of her marriage. And 10 years later, she went out, had a one-night stand. Now she has a son. So
I love it.
there aren't a whole lot of absolutes in this.
Absolutely not.
So, all right, I'm going to let you plug everything in a minute, but this is your first time in this podcast. As you may or may not know, we play something called worst date or first date. So you have to think back to your swinging single dating days and either give us the absolute worst date you've ever went on or the best date you ever went on. Your choice.
Oh my God. Okay. This one is really bad. It's so bad, I don't even know that I want to share it, but it came to my mind, so I'm just going to say it. All right, so I went on this date. It was from Match.com. I was probably, whoever remembers that was like 2 decades ago or something. But it was one of the earliest dating apps, and I met this guy. He's a musician. He went to Juilliard. He's all like the sexy artist, blah, blah thing, that I thought was so hot when I was in my mid-20s. And we went on this was like our second or third date, okay? But I had realized at this point it wasn't going to work. Even though he was a Scorpio, and I love the Scorpio astrology sign. But
Finally.
Right?
Finally.
A Scorpio, right? So I thought I loved the astrology sign. Anyway, we're on this date, and he, as I'm going to end it, right, and say this isn't working, he looks at me and he starts telling me this story about how when he used to live in New York City, I lived in Florida at the time, he was a heroin addict, and he tried to commit suicide by and he was only saved because his landlord happened to come by and find him in his apartment. And now I'm not trivializing this. So as I'm telling this story, it suddenly sounds like I'm making fun of this, but I'm not. It's a very serious thing. The issue with the bad date part was that he then looked at me and said, and I've never felt complete until I met you.
Oh, no.
And I was like, holy shit, get the fuck out of here. And so I was like, okay, no. And I kind of ended it, and it was rough. So, I mean, that really is those
damn thrill-seeking Scorpios.
I know. But I will say, I really feel like the caveat that's necessary here is I would never poke fun at anyone who is suffering with addiction. Addiction is a very, very serious thing, as is mental health. But what's equally as important is that we don't succumb to people's desires to pull us into their problems.
He was addicted to love.
Yeah, when they have nothing to do with us.
All right. You're very wise woman, and I really like that. Tell everybody where they can find you, work with you, and your podcast.
Thank you so much. So my podcast is Badass Fertility, and you can find it on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to your shows. It's a weekly show. It drops on Tuesdays. And we talk about a lot of the different types of things that you heard here. You can go to my website, badassfertility.com. There's 2 things on there that are super awesome. I have a giveaway, which is a really great freebie. It's 5 tips to become a mom faster and with less stress. So that's a really good way to kind of get in there, get some more concrete information from me, and start to explore, this whole idea. If you want to jump past that freebie and just meet with me, like I said earlier, there's also a link at badassfertility.com for my calendar. And if you want daily hits of inspiration, education, and just connection, go to Instagram. Badass Fertility is my handle, and you will find me there as well.
This was fun.
This was so fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming. As far as us, please like, share, follow, and review not just Badass Fertility, but the Great Love Debate. Your reviews still, after 8 years, mean a lot in the podcasting ecosystem. Shoot us an email, greatlovedebate@gmail.com, if you have any questions, issues, or concerns with things that I've said, or you want to get in touch with Kathryn and you don't want to reach out directly, we'll pass it along. Go to greatlovedebate.com, our live tour schedule. We are in our 10th season of going around the world. We don't go around the world as much as we used to, but we do. We have upcoming shows in Raleigh, North Carolina, Tempe, Arizona, New York, and probably one right here in Boca Raton, Florida. So check that out. Tickets for most of them, I believe, are on sale, greatlovedebate.com. Because as always, at the Great Love Debate, we never stop making love. See you next time.